I would like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners on the land with which we meet today, which for me is the Larrakia people. I also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. I acknowledge the profound impact of domestic and family violence on individuals, families, and the wider community in Australia. I support initiatives aimed at preventing domestic and family violence and creating a space where everyone feels safe and supported. Finally, I wish to acknowledge that we all come from different places and have different circumstances. I respect and welcome our collective differences, and I strive to create a space where all voices are heard and valued, and where everyone feels comfortable in engaging and participating. And I hope you'll join me with that today. Please note that this session will be recorded. On the 19th of August, from 12:30 to 1:30 Australian Central Standard Time, we will be joined for our next biosecurity think tank by Dr. Bonnie Cummings. Dr. Bonnie is based with AMRIC, and she's going to talk about approaches to effective engagement with remote communities, and I think that will be a really good one for people interested in that space. For those based in Darwin, on Friday the 21st of August, we'll have breakfast with Yvette Rowe from Charles Darwin University from 9 to 10 Australian Central Standard Time. And on Thursday, the 3rd of September, we have the next Mind Your Melon training session with Tom from Healthy Minds. Tom will be talking about building workplace connectedness, and the session will run from 11 Australian Central Standard Time. And finally, on the 11th of September, we have our next lunch with leaders from 12:30 to 1:30 Australian Central Standard Time. This time we will be hearing from Lloyd Clump. If you are interested in any of these upcoming events, please check out the What's On page on the Animico website. And if you're not on our email distribution list and you would like to be, please don't hesitate to send me or Chantel an email and we'll sign you up. There will be a survey at the end of today's session. We're really interested in feedback from you, so please spend 1 to 2 minutes providing us with feedback so we can make sure that we can meet your needs. And at this point, I get to introduce Dr. Ruth Marcec-Greaves, who's a veterinarian and conservation scientist whose work focuses on the intersection of livestock, wildlife, ecosystem, and human health. Her career has spanned zoological institutions, livestock systems, research laboratories, and field conservation projects in the United States, Australia, Honduras, Peru, and China, where she has worked on disease surveillance, biosecurity, animal health, and conservation education, and across a wide range of species and communities. So it's lovely to welcome you, Ruth. Thank you so much for joining us. I don't know what time it is in the US, but I really do appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, no, I'm very excited to be here. Can you hear me okay?
We can, yep, it's fabulous.
Perfect. Yeah, perfect. So good morning to you all. So yeah, I'm very excited today to talk to you about one of my favorite topics, which is One Health. Really, to me, One Health is just collaboration in action. Before I kind of get into it, I'll give you kind of a little story I have about One Health and it being, defined to one of my friends. I teach at a university, and it's a university specifically for environmental students and students going into all aspects of environmental monitoring, be it animal, plants, biosecurity, what have you. And I was teaching a One Health course. One of my very close colleagues works with our Fish and Wildlife Department, and he works for the United States governing trade, so animals coming in and out of the country, particularly looking at disease prevention. And he got excited when I told him about the course, and he said, "Oh, I want to know more about One Health. I recently was invited to a One Health conference, but I declined to go because I'm not a One Health professional." And so it was a little education moment for him because I said, "Actually, you are. There's not such a thing as somebody who is a true One Health professional, as in we are all One Health professionals. What One Health is it is people bringing their professions together and working together to solve problems. So if you work in trade, you should go and work together with the other people with their various backgrounds to solve these One Health problems." So that's kind of the message for today is just, we are all One Health professionals. We are all working together to solve various problems. And I'm excited to talk to you about some of the less traditional kind of thought processes behind what One Health is. So a little bit about me. First and foremost, I have a very broad background. I've worked with all sorts of animals, all sorts of backgrounds, all sorts of disciplines, but what you'll learn a lot about me today is I love amphibians. My PhD was in amphibian reproduction and amphibian populations, which ties in a lot to ecosystem health and One Health, really, which I'll touch on in some of my examples. But that's not the most traditional of animals to talk about, but I will be touching a lot on amphibians today. But that being said, I do have a broad range of skills and a broad range of experiences. I see myself a little bit of a multi-tool. So a little bit of a secret about me, I didn't start out planning to be a scientist. I initially wanted to be an actress, and I'll circle back to that in a little bit. But I very quickly resorted back to the passion I had since I was a child, which is biology. Since I was a child, I was always outside working with fish and with amphibians and reptiles, all the things outside, particularly the creepy crawly things, but all of the animals. And so I circled back to biology. I focused a lot on population biology, and then I decided to go to veterinary school. So I became a veterinarian in veterinary school. I worked mostly with livestock because I was fascinated with population biology and working with population health. And then that made me kind of think about the population as a whole and how the ecosystem and the environment is affected by populations and vice versa. So I did a little bit of extra studies in what you would call ecosystem health, and that looks at wildlife and how wildlife is affected by the ecosystem. While I was doing a lot of that work, I interacted a lot with various academics and people working in biosecurity and different fields. I loved what they were doing, but I found there was a lot of different silos. So people that worked in ecology didn't necessarily want to cross-contaminate and cross-pollinate with the veterinarians, and it was very hard to break down those barriers. And so not only because I was fascinated with population health and population management did I want to go on to get a PhD, but I wanted to go on to get a PhD to help break down those barriers and maybe kind of help break down those silos. So I went on to get my PhD working with amphibian populations and working with ecosystem management and working a little bit in conservation, a little bit in a bit of everything with my PhD, but focusing on amphibians. And even though that did open a lot more doors and help break down some of the silos, I still saw a lot of people wanting to work with their own. And this is where I found that perhaps, that initial instinct to be an actress was a really good instinct after all. Because really, what I find my passion is, obviously, I love the animals. Obviously, I love the biology. Obviously, I love the ecology. But at my core, I am a collaborator. I love working with people that have different skill sets than me. I love bringing the skill sets I have to other people. I love looking at a problem and trying to figure out who needs to be involved in this, what skill sets are needed in this problem, and how can I teach people skills they need, and how can we work together to fix this. So that's kind of why One Health really works for me, because at its core, that's kind of what One Health is. So, what is One Health? I think a lot of times when people imagine One Health, they're picturing zoonoses or blight or diseases. I think, because the word health is in it, disease is the first thing that comes to mind. And while absolutely, that is part of One Health. I've worked on many disease outbreaks with public health experts and containment issues. That's not the only thing that encompasses One Health. So really what One Health is, if you look at your wildlife, your domestic animals, your humans, your agriculture, your domestic plants, your wild plants, and your environment as a whole, it's all of the interactions between these things, be that any kind of health issue, contamination issue, any kind of weather issue, anything that it causes interaction between these spheres encompasses One Health. So if something goes a little awry, we want to make sure we address that problem and fix it to keep these spheres in a healthy balance. So kind of a less traditional example I can give you that doesn't encompass that zoonoses or, immediate disease aspect that comes to mind involves this little palm weevil here. So I have a friend who works for our U.S. Department of Agriculture, and he came to me and asked me to consult with him on this issue. We were starting to see these little palm weevils transfer over the border from Mexico into California, infecting our palms. And initially, we were just seeing them in our kind of our attractive palms, the palms you would plant in your yard for just being ornamental. But the bigger concern was that they were going to start affecting our date palms, so palms that we grow for agricultural purposes. And so on the surface, this looks like an issue that is a pretty straightforward, that's an entomological issue, that is an issue that we are just going to straightforward look at with the plant producers. But there's really a lot more to it than this. That this is really a One Health issue, because when you start considering we need to protect the borders from an insect coming in. This is a pest control problem. And then once we're concerned about this pest actually crossing the borders, we have to then consider human health and environmental health, because we'll have to start considering how we are going to be treating for these animals. This pest also, which is part of the reason I was consulted for, carries a nematode. And so we were concerned about this nematode infecting the palms and then affecting other plants nearby. And then palm destruction, how we dispose of the palms is potentially unsafe if there are large swaths of palms being destroyed by the palm weevil, which is potentially dangerous for people, but also damaging to the environment. So overall, this is a large One Health issue and not just a entomological or plant concern. So overall, One Health encompasses many, I would almost argue all disciplines. And there's a lot of overlap in a lot of these disciplines. This little diagram shows some things like land management and biosecurity under animal health, which we all know that's not under animal health, that's under everything. But it's just a diagram to show and demonstrate that there are many different disciplines that fall under this One Health umbrella and that share the responsibility of making sure the environment, the animals and plants and humans maintain this healthy balance together. And I do want to highlight the importance of biosecurity here. Biosecurity really is the first line of defense for protecting One Health. We're going to be doing the surveillance. We're going to then, if we find something, be doing the protection from, be it invasive species, be it diseases, anything like that. Biosecurity is that first line of protection under the One Health umbrella. So now that we have kind of an idea of what One Health is, now that you got the spiel I might give my class about One Health, I want to give you a couple of examples from my experiences in One Health spheres. So the first one I want to talk to you about is from my my experiences in Honduras. So I worked in Honduras. I lived in Honduras for 2 years working on a project. This project had been going for, oh my goodness, probably about a decade. But I'll kind of explain the background of it to you and how I got there, and then how it was a One Health issue that we kind of turned into a team effort and came up with a solution to. So the Honduras Amphibian Rescue and Conservation Center, that's the original name. We actually recently changed it, but the Honduras Amphibian Rescue and Conservation Center. This was a project developed by a zoological institution in the United States. There were some amphibians, a few species of frogs in the cloud forests of Honduras that were identified as drastically declining, and they were already critically endangered, and they were identified as having a disease that was causing them to drastically decline. And so a gentleman came to this particular zoo and asked somebody there for help. And so that particular person came up with this project. That person decided to send these containers down to Honduras and turn them into breeding facilities. So that happened in about 2010. I became involved in the project in 2017. So initially, the project didn't get a lot of traction. It was very hard working with the government to pick up a lot of traction in Honduras. In 2017, I came down and kind of helped them come up with a biosecurity plan. This is what the inside of the pods looked like, with tanks set up for breeding, and then a little vestibule to have people kind of dress in, dress out, and disinfect. But so we came up with this plan for breeding and releasing animals back into the wild. But the first time I went down to Honduras and I looked at this planning and this project and we put it together, these pods are not where the frogs actually live. And I, asked if I could go see where the frogs actually live and talk to the people in that area. And that's where this became clear to me. This was much more than a conservation problem. This was a One Health problem. So yes, these animals have a disease. And, from my knowledge of amphibians and from my knowledge of really ecosystem health, when animals like this have a disease, there's something wrong in the environment. This is not strictly a disease that we can treat, release animals back into the wild, and it will be cured. We really need to consider what's going on in the environment. Now, these animals that we were working with are from a national park in Honduras that was specifically put in place to help protect a watershed. This watershed feeds the water system for the second largest city in Honduras. It's called the northern capital of Honduras, San Pedro Sula. And so this national park is specifically there to protect human water sources. And if we're seeing amphibians start to get sick and die, we need to be very concerned about water quality. Amphibians and water quality go hand in hand. And so that's an alarm bell for me. And so we also need to start worrying about, not just human health with water health, but also we need to start worrying about agriculture. San Pedro Sula doesn't have a lot of agriculture, but in this mountain range, the Marendan Mountains, there's a lot of coffee growers. And so we need to be concerned about the livelihood of the people in these mountains if there is an issue with their watershed and an issue with their amphibians. So I knew a lot of people with the IUCN, and so I put together a meeting with them, knowing that they were about to redo red listing all over the world. I said Honduras probably needs a bit of an assessment, and so we put together a meeting. And then at this meeting, I pulled together the project partners on this project. I also made sure national government was there. And then we had local land managers involved so that we could discuss the watershed, the importance of the watershed and the amphibians to the watershed, and then any academics that might be interested in doing research on this project. And we put our heads together and, with the project partners and with these academics, we discussed the current plan was to breed and release animals. And I explained, this isn't necessarily the smartest way to go about helping these animals. And helping these animals isn't the only thing we need to do here. So we want to support the community, we want to support the country, and we want to figure out what the best solution is for everyone involved, the animals, the environment, and the humans. And so by coming together with all of the stakeholders, we came up with a mutually beneficial plan. So first and foremost, what needed to happen was I needed to turn this zoo-founded project into a non-governmental organization. So I created this full organization and moved down to Honduras for 2 years. And the purpose of moving down there was to build capacity and train people in so that we could develop a mobile sperm lab. Now, saying mobile sperm lab, that doesn't sound very One Health, but in effect, it very much is. So what we were going to do was we were going to collect sperm and other gametes eventually, but first and foremost sperm because it's the easiest to collect from the amphibians in the mountains and freeze it. And then we were going to keep that in perpetuity for potential long-term breeding in the field if necessary, but also more importantly, learning long-term from genetic and generational data. So we know over time these animals may develop resistance or they may end up having other changes. We may see changes in the environment that affect these animals that we can track over time through these genetics. And that is extraordinarily beneficial if we take these year over year. So not only is this a safety net where we have genetics and we can either de-extinct in effect or restore the populations through having their gametes, but we can also make sure to track their genetic health and the environmental health through time. Now, the goal of it being mobile was to meet the animals and the people where they were at. We didn't have the luxury of developing a mobile sperm, we did not have the luxury of developing a fancy sperm lab, but then also we didn't want to take the animals out of the field for contamination reasons, for stress reasons, and then just for safety reasons of the animals and the labs. So we wanted to meet them in the field, get this process to be a quick and dirty process and get it done as fast as possible for the animals' sake and for safety's sake. This is essentially an emergency conservation tactic. Ultimately, if we're protecting the animals and we are hopefully increasing their numbers over time and tracking their genetics over time, we'll be protecting the watershed. We also, in addition to this, we're going to start doing water testing, and we were going to start doing more biodiversity assessments. Additionally, the extra benefit of this mobile sperm lab is it's not just for sperm, it's for other things as well. So this is something that we could apply not only to other species of animals, but plants as well. So that very big cryo tank I'm standing next to in that picture is one specifically for seeds. That's a seed bank that I worked with in Mexico. And so that was something I was able, the knowledge I was able to transfer that I learned in Mexico to Honduras. And so we were able to take that knowledge and transfer it to not only frogs, but to seeds and to many other species. So this is a very novel approach. Now, freezing sperm is not a novel approach, but freezing it for endangered amphibians in the field where they are at without having a tested protocol is very novel. So we created our mobile sperm lab and we tried it out, and we were very successful in our pilot with our target species. And I was able to train our, that's the head of the biology department at our partnering university. So he was able to pick up the techniques very quickly. And then just so you can get a look at, that's the little tent. That's what the mobile sperm lab looks like. And it also has night capabilities if you have enough generator power. And then we were able to get a donation of a couple cryo storage tanks to send down to Honduras. So we've got a great start of 2 cryo storage tanks, one specifically for frog and salamander sperm, and then the other for other species. So we have also started a tank with some coral and some reptile and some other various species that we are sperm freezing in. So that's a very exciting partnership going on. And they're stored at 2 locations, one at a university and one at a botanical garden. The environmental studies, so we continue to check the environments. We started by looking for water quality in not only the streams where these animals breed and where the tadpoles develop, but then in these little bromeliads up in the trees. So we would take little water samples and then actually check the bromeliads in our biodiversity assessment. So I've got a little camera. It's a borescope that you would use for plumbing tied to that pole there. And so I'm looking at the camera on that pole there. So that's a novel way to look in those. Historically in Honduras, they would knock those plants down and completely pull them apart and destroy the little homes of the frogs in order to look for them. So now we can use this novel technique to look for the frogs, but we would test the water in those and then also test the streams, test the soil quality. And since I clearly don't live in Honduras anymore, and then also I could not be in the field constantly, we started a collaboration with a nonprofit group that kind of runs the national forest, and they have been continuing this environmental work for us. So they are continuing to test the environments and let us know any changes and mitigate any issues we are seeing. So moving forward, we're seeing great success here, and we're making steps. We've rebranded because it's not a breeding and rescue facility anymore. It's the Honduras Amphibian Research Consultancy. And we got a lot of community buy-in. So our pods before were the little shipping containers, we call them pods. The community came out and painted them. They hired an artist to come out and paint them because they're very supportive of the project. And then we have a lot of different groups, research groups in the area that are interested in collaborating and supporting the work. So this is one of those examples, as I said, that it started out as something that was very narrow focused. It started out as something that was, this is a strict conservation project. We are going to go in, breed and release frogs. And then when you take a step back, it's something that affects everybody. And, it's something that needs a lot more weight, a lot more buy-in, a lot more stakeholders say, not only to be successful, but also because it's affecting everything. It's affecting the humans, it's affecting the water, it's affecting the environment. And so it was only successful when we got more people at the table. Long term, this project has been, the goal was always to hand it over to be Honduran run. And that is why I no longer live in Honduras. We got it to a successful point once we got that training and capacity built. And so now it's being run by the Hondurans. I do occasionally check in to make sure that they don't need any retraining, or if there's something new they want to learn, I'll help them out. But we're very, very proud of how this has gone. So another example I would love to give you is something a little smaller scale, but equally valid and equally exciting. So I worked on a project in Peru where the project itself was pretty grandiose, if you want to say it that way. I was working with both the zoo that I worked for, as well as an ecotourism company, where I would go down and we had weather stations, and we would test frogs for disease, and then we would do biodiversity assessments, all to get a picture of the overall population success. But while I was there, when I would go and speak with the indigenous communities, it was very clear that frogs were getting a bad name. So in that area, frogs were seen as bad luck. Frogs, if they were near houses, would be killed. And then there was also a rumor that if a girl touched a frog, she would get pregnant. And so this was, seen as, I mean, I guess if some people wanted to get pregnant, that would be good. But the young girls were terrified of frogs, and so they would have boys go and kill them. And there was it was seen as, they were seen as pests, and so frogs around the villages were declining in populations because people were trying to keep them away. Now, relevance to One Health. It is very obvious in areas where malaria is prevalent. If frogs are low in numbers, malaria is much higher in numbers. So we wanted to help these communities make sure they understood that frogs were important, not only because they're important to the environment and they're important for water quality, et cetera, but they're important for your health. They're important because they eat the little bugs that bite you and give you malaria. So rather than just, sharing that straight message and trying to teach them a straightforward lesson, I started a program with the local schools, and I came in and explained to them what I was doing. I explained, I'm here to learn about really all the animal populations, but starting with amphibians, because amphibians are really good indicators of how the environment is doing, and this is why they're important, and I need your help. And so I taught them how to test for disease, and I asked them to help me look for the amphibians, and I had them help me form a club called the Amphibian Protector Club. And I got them engaged. I would take them out on field surveys with me, and I had them start a WhatsApp chat with me. They called it WhatsAppo, sapo being toad in Spanish. And when I was not there, they would send me pictures of all the frogs and toads they found, helping identify them. And they had a really good time of it. Also, I would have them go on adventures when I was there, not just out on outings with me, but for example, there's a canopy walk there, and most of them had never had an experience like that before. So I took them up above the canopy so they could see where they lived from above and really engage with and appreciate nature from just a different point of view, not just, the normal day to day, yeah, this is where I live, but this is something beautiful and this is something I can appreciate. And that got a really big response. They, after going down for, a couple of about 6 months or so, I came back and they put on a little play for me about how frogs don't get you pregnant. And they really got engaged in going out and helping me test for diseases. And the WhatsAppo chat just made my day. I would get so many pictures, and they were so excited when they found something they hadn't seen before. And that's something that's just very replicable. Just getting, getting kids out in nature, kids that have never been off the couch before. I work with a group in Kentucky for they're kids of coal miners, and they're kids, a lot of them that have never been off the couch, getting them out to go do some benthic macroinvertebrate studies. They are just so engaged. And then, just having some fun. Um, I think it's so beneficial to engage the community and kind of help them turn their mind around on nature. And that sounds all pie in the sky and just very maybe a little bit hippie, like, oh, get kids involved in nature. But back to the point of it's for health. So, we're thinking here in terms of, well, we need nature here to protect human health. We need nature here to protect, agricultural health. It's not just about getting kids to like nature. It's about protection of the environment and about protection of people. So it's all about collaborations, not just on the bigger scale of collaborations with government and with colleagues, et cetera, but also collaborations with community, be that with, community adults, or be that with community children. So that's my presentation. I hope that that was maybe somewhat a less traditional, but a little bit of a fun presentation discussing One Health from maybe a little bit of a different perspective than the traditional disease perspective. And if you have any questions, I would love to answer them.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Ruth. What fabulous stories you had to share with us today. How interesting the work is that you have done. I have no doubt that we've got some questions from people. Has anyone got a question that they either want to pop into the chat or pop up your hand and you can ask Ruth directly? It's a great opportunity to talk to her about the work that she's done, ask about any of the, work that you're currently doing that you wouldn't mind advice on, ask a bit more about One Health, whatever it is that is on your mind right now. We'd love to hear from you. Chantel.
Hi. Ruth, so you've worked with governments, researchers, producers, conservation organisations. What are the most common mistakes that you see when experts are trying to communicate biosecurity or conservation risks? And what approaches have you taken to build trust when engaging in those areas?
I think probably the most common the most common mistake I see is talking down to them. Um, I, it sounds probably contrived, but it's always the meeting them where they're at. I like to come in and hear from them first and say, so where are you at? What are your ideas? What are your thoughts? And then come back at them with what my thoughts and feelings are. Um, because, more often than not, you do need to give them advice and do need to gently re-guide them on some policies and protocols, but I think they're also very smart and well-informed and know what they're doing. And so I think I see often mistakes of they get their feathers ruffled because they feel like they're being talked down to.
That's great. Thank you.
Amazing, Ruth. I have a question while we wait for some other questions to come in. Now, you talked about some really fabulous success stories that you've had. Have there been, I guess I've got two questions. The first one is, have there been any communities where you've had real challenges with, getting the community on board? And I guess the examples that you used were very much, I guess, the environment and the community caring for the environment that they live in. But in a lot of cases, the people that are here are likely to be working with pests and diseases relating to agriculture, so it can be much more difficult to get community engagement in those areas where they perhaps don't feel that they benefit from supporting that or helping with that. Have you got any examples where you've actually had to deal with that, and how did you go about getting the community on board where perhaps the buy-in wasn't so obvious?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That was a two-part question, and the first part.
Have you had any challenges yourself in getting the community involved? And then
Oh,
secondly, I guess more around the agricultural pests and disease element.
no, absolutely. So getting the community involved is frequently a challenge. I think it's a matter of helping them understand what's in it for me. And that's kids are a great example because kids, it's not always as hard to get kids excited about things. The adults need to understand how this benefits them, and that is frequently a challenge. And be it something that is, environmental, or be it something that is a pest or something other, more agricultural. They need to understand, why do I need to do this, and how is this going to positively affect me? Um, we Back in Illinois, we had a lot of their soy aphids. I'm not sure if you have them there. Probably not. But we had these a huge plague of soybean aphids one year, and so we were trying to get the farmers to help us control them. And while the people that had soybeans were very avid that they needed help with that, other farmers, say with corn, were not so excited about controlling the soybean aphids because they thought it would affect their crop. That's not the case. It wasn't going to affect their crops, but we had challenges trying to convince them that this is safe. This is just something to help other people. And I think that's always the challenge, back to the what's in it for me. People don't always find helping other people as a good enough incentive. And so we kind of had to bring it up as it's going to help the economy overall. Ultimately, this will help you as well if we are able to get rid of these aphids. It isn't going to directly impact your crop, but it is going to help overall the economy, which is going to impact you.
Wow, that's really interesting. Ruth, I have another question for you. Obviously, you may not be aware, but at the moment, bird flu is a really big issue here in Australia. And I'm just wondering, I believe that I've spoken to you before and that you mentioned that you were dealing with bird flu. I'm just wondering if you could give us a little bit of a recap on your experience with bird flu and perhaps what you did around that, just for the people here.
Yes. Yes. So we, have actively been dealing with it in the United States for quite some time. And it's not a fun issue. So I work in a zoo right now, and so we have endangered species of birds on grounds. And so at the zoo, we have to manage our animals very differently than our colleagues that have farm animals. And I work with both. So I work in both arenas, and I consult with and help manage the agricultural birds, but then I have my own birds at my zoo. And so we have a challenge where, so we fortunately have not had any cases in our birds at the zoo, but we are concerned. So say if one of our endangered penguins got bird flu, by law, we would have to cull the whole colony. And so we have discussed a lot of this with our representatives of are there ways around that? And circumstantially there are. And so that is something that, depending on how the bird was kept, et cetera, there are circumstances where there may be ways around that. But then that's also something that we feel a little unfair about when somebody that has a yard full of chickens has to cull their entire flock of chickens. And that is something that has been brought up as, how is that fair if the zoo doesn't have to cull their penguins and I have to cull my backyard chickens? And that's, it's something we've had to communicate and discuss with the public, even though, again, it's not an actuality, it's something that people are aware of, and it's something we've had to communicate.
Amazing. Well, that is fantastic. I've got a couple of questions in the chat. Kate has asked, are there any particular resources you'd suggest for staying across current research in your field, databases, journals, etc., that you find particularly helpful?
Oh my goodness. So many. I would probably have to send you a list afterwards if that's okay.
100%. And Bridget has asked, with reference to H5, do the zoos use vaccination to protect?
Certain species. Most of them we don't, just because we're not sure how they would react to it, but there are certain species we do.
Yeah, fantastic. And Hannah has asked, do you see common themes between community engagement in Central and South America versus USA, i.e. is there more willingness to listen and understand or greater resistance to change?
I, it's one of those things where obviously people act different because they're very different places, but the way they respond as far as how they respond to what you're recommending or how they respond to change, people are people. So I feel like if you're recommending a change to a particular community, I don't see much of a difference in how people respond. Overall, cultural differences, absolutely. But as far as just the act of responding, I see it fairly similar.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Ruth. I have another question for you, and I guess it's more of a what would you do question. But I guess we're always on the lookout for pests and diseases here in Australia. And one of the things I guess that I'm interested from your perspective, having dealt with this, is how would you approach if you were found if there was a pest or disease detected in say livestock, and you had to do something about it? I know that's probably not directly related to your current role, but maybe let's just play this one out. What would be the things what do you think are the critical things to do as a starting point? Because I guess one of the things that I've noticed in biosecurity is that we're often slow to engage with the industry and the community. And I'm just wondering from your perspective, what approach you would take.
Yeah, I mean, that's where I think it's very important immediately to let people know, at least in the immediate community, so that you can kind of lock down nearby and be as biosecure as possible, not just in that immediate individual farm or individual production area, but then nearby can be as well as incoming and outgoing, so that they don't accidentally bring something in. And then, yeah, contact as many important colleagues as possible that are, collaborate. I guess that's, my point, not only, bring in the veterinarians, but also bring in any public health necessary people to start, and then escalate from there.
Yeah, amazing. And at what point would you be telling the community what's going on in those sorts of situations?
I mean, I guess if you found one animal with something, I wouldn't start then. But if you start to see like groups of animals, and if you see it spread, that's when I would say, if you see it spread from farm to farm, that's when I would tell the community.
Great. Amazing. Well, we don't have any more questions in the chat, and I can't see anyone's hands up. So I'm going to ask Chantel to pop the survey into the chat box for you all to fill that out. I would love to thank Ruth for joining us for today. It's so amazing to have you, Ruth. I really appreciate your perspectives. It's always great to hear what someone else is doing in other locations. So it's amazing to hear from you and your perspectives on such a variety of different, species and communities. So thank you so much for sharing your experiences with us today and for joining us so late for you. I really do appreciate you staying online. I'm sure you will all join me in thanking Ruth for today's session. And like I said, if you can give us some feedback on that, we're always really happy to take your feedback and to use it as best we can. On that note, have an amazing Friday. It's been so lovely to have you this morning, and we will look forward to seeing you at future events. So looking forward to seeing you then. Thanks so much. And thanks again, Ruth.
Yep. Thank you all.